Hey everybody, the Game Dad back for a first time review on board gaming. I know when I first started this channel, one of my big goals was to talk about games from the perspective of a dad, of a husband, and why I make some choices in my gaming. And so I thought I'd put out my first review on a game that I just acquired called Libris. This is a Renegade Game Studio production, and I really do enjoy their games. Not necessarily a kid's game, but I can tell you why as a dad I would want to choose this one for later on with my kiddos. We're going to go over a brief overview of the game, so you'll have to mind the swinging camera, and then we'll come back and I'll tell you exactly why I picked this one for playing with the kids. Now, as you can see, we've got several components here. If you want to get an overview of all of the components, I recommend going and watching my unboxing video. But we're going to go over just a little bit of components, a little bit of rules, and then we'll go back for a summary afterwards. So, to start out, you're going to first let everyone pick out their player pieces here. You've got your normal player pieces, and for a beginner game it recommends letting folks use all three. We did it just with the two and everything worked just fine. So you would start with two of your regular workers. Unless you're wanting to feel a little bit beginnery, you can add in the third one. And then what you do is you shuffle this deck up and you deal out two per person playing. So in a 4-person setup, ideally you would have 8 of these out, and each person is going to pick one to keep and one to get rid of. And you're going to look at these player powers. They're going to do some different things whenever you work or place with your special character meeple. So for example, this one's the Sasquatch. Sasquatch lets you pick up cards that are left over on the worker placement spaces, such as this, at the end of the round, and I'll tell you why that's good and bad towards the end of the review here. But our probably most popular one, just because of the cool meeple, little gelatinous cube here, will actually let you do some fun things when your opponent visits spaces where the cube is. So you go over the different powers, pick one to keep, and maybe get rid of one that you don't want your buddy to get after you've decided who's going first. You do this in reverse player order. So first player is chosen by the person who's most recently acquired a book, or you could always just roll the gelatinous cube. That doesn't make sense. You could always just roll a die. I usually carry dice with me everywhere I go. But I would recommend rolling a die if there's not a bunch of book readers. So whoever most recently acquired a book, or whoever rolled highest, however you choose to do it, you're going to go in the reverse of that order. So the person who gets this first player marker gets to choose last. Then what you do, so for each round you're going to put out these tiles. And you'll notice that there are little worker placement spots on each one. So you're either able to place one of your basic workers, or whichever one of your specialty workers you picked in those spaces. Now, depending on who you picked, so if we picked Mr. Sasquatch here, his power doesn't activate when he goes on a space, but a snowman, for example, once he is placed on a spot, no one else can go visit there. So it's a good way to lock people out of something that's fairly useful. And you're going to continue to do this until your library is completely built. Your library consists of these cards here. These are your library shelf cards. Everyone gets 6 to start with, and then as you place, you either draw or shelf cards from your hand. You are going to have a secret objective, which is these cards here. These are your books. So one will go here at the top of this board in the prominent works section, you get points based on how many of those you have more than your other players at the end, and you have a banned books section. For each one of these in your library, you lose a point. And then each one is distributed secretly to the other players. And so this is, for example, if you were dealt this one, you would be looking for the corrupted codices. Codices, sorry. You would want to fill your library with as many of those, because for however many of those you have, at the end of the game, you get 2 times that number in points. And again, this is a competitive game, so he or she who has the most points at the end wins. So you'll go through this. Once everyone's worker placed, you find the tile that has the lowest number, so this would be 1. You always start with the diviner's hut. It's also how you take the first player marker. But at the end of each round, once everyone's worker placed, during the cleanup, you place a tile on this board. The rest are discarded. You shuffle up and deal more out. You do that over and over again until someone has put their 12th card in their library. And then after that, that triggers the end of the game. The rounds continue out, and points are scored based on alphabetical order. So your library has to be in alphabetical order, just like any other library would be. If it's not, the cards that are out of order get flipped on their backside, and you do not get to score points based off of this. Then, shelf stability. So you get you have a maximum shelf size of 3 high, but as many wide as you would like. So if my shelf ended up looking something like this but flipped towards the other sides, my shelf stability would be a total of 4, because I have 4 in a stability quadrant. It can go as high up as 3 and as wide out as possible. So then for prominent works, so for this game it would be the spells and potions here. You would be getting, the person with the most would be getting 15 points, second most 9, and third most 4. If you're playing a 2-player game, then obviously one person would get 15, one person would get 9. But in a 4-player game, someone's going to get 0 for that. For your banned books, so the reference text would be for this setup. For each reference text in your library, you would get -1 point. So this library is already looking at -3 points. Then your categorical variety, each player earns 3 points for every book in their bookshelf of the category in which they have the least of, not including banned categories. So you actually count up how many of each one you have, and the one that is the lowest number that you have, you get that many points times 3. So in this library, it looks like I have the fewest of monster manuals, corrupted codices, and spells and potions. I have 2 of each one, so that multiplier would be 2 times 3, would give me 6 points for that. And then your library focus, again, mine was the corrupted codices, so I would get 2 points times the number of those books, so this would be 4 points. And then the person with the most points at the end of the game wins. That is how we play Ex Libris. Sorry for the swinging camera. We're eventually going to get editing software. So, as a dad, I try to look for games that are going to at least stimulate part of the brain other than just excitement, entertainment, enjoyment. There's a lot of critical thinking processes that go behind playing this game. There's making sure things are in alphabetical order, counting, categorizing based on types, and it really does expand that part of the brain that keeps growing and learning. The box cover. Ooh, this is going to be a rough one to look at in the next few years and go, man, look at where it came from. But the recommended age on this one is 10 and up. I've always said that when playing games, it's not necessarily the age, it's knowing the kid that you're playing with. I obviously wouldn't let my 3-year-old or 1-year-old play with this. My 1-year-old would just chew on the pieces, and my 3-year-old would get bored very, very quickly. But I imagine as the years go by, we could just start to introduce this around 6, 7, 8, if they're starting to grasp those concepts a little bit earlier than 10. But that's up to you. Know your kiddo. If they're a little bit higher up on the learning curve, introduce it to them. If they're struggling with it a little bit more, I would say hold off, or find you a game that is a little bit more educationally based that's going to help them curve up to that. MSRP on this one is $60. That's according to the manual that comes with the game. I save up and try to spend less than about $100 a month on board games, due to the fact that, you know, I've got 2 kids and a wife that like to eat and have clothes on their back. So this one ate up 60% of that budget. But with the amount of replayability, the character classes, the building of the libraries, getting to do different things with different individual player powers, there's a lot of bang for your buck here. The component quality I would rate probably on the scale of between 6 and 7. I feel like for $60, the individual wooden meeples are nice and chunky bits, but I feel like they could have maybe done a little bit more with the individual player powered meeples, maybe made them out of a plastic or a resin instead of just wood to differentiate them. Not necessarily higher detailed, because I know that that's very expensive to do, but maybe just made them a different material, something that was made them stand out a little bit more, especially the witch and the wizard get confused with the other meeples very easily on that board state. So just making them out of a different material might have helped. As far as gameplay and enjoyment goes, I'm giving this one about a 7.5 on the scale, which is high for me. I don't really rate much things higher than about an 8.5, 9. And that game has to knock my socks off. Like, #1 game on Board Game Geek right now is Gloomhaven. I'm currently playing that one with a group of friends, and I would say it's right at about an 8.5 to a 9, I think is what I rated it on the BGG. I have to go back and look. But it's a great, great game. That is a wonderful game, and I don't think I've ever played a game, nor do I think I ever will play a game that's quite like it. But a 7.5, that's just for reference point. A 7.5 is fairly high on the scale that I grade games on. Positives, again, really fun gameplay, really fun interaction with players as you're placing your meeples. You do have the ability to stop players from doing things, but one of the negatives that I've heard some reviewers say about this game is that some of the individual player powers seem more overpowered than others. I haven't experienced that yet in this game, and I've played it enough times to have seen a fair share of these, and I feel like the maybe overbalanced thing that they were seeing was in a certain group of those. I feel like if you're very decisive and you into those cards when you're choosing and eliminating at the beginning of the game, you can help really mitigate some of that overpoweredness. You can look in what's going to be more balanced to play against and kind of get rid of some of that other stuff. The biggest negative and the thing that probably hurts me the most to say about this game is the printing on some of these cards, the worker placement spaces. I mentioned it a little bit in my unboxing video, but some of them aren't super hard to read. Like this one here, it's very dark background and white text is fine. However, the thing that just irritates me is how some of these are just almost completely unreadable. You have text right here, and that's a darker background, but some of these have incredibly light backgrounds, still with a white text, not enough drop shadow, very small printing. You've got that on a big table. It's going to be difficult to read. That's my biggest hang up with this game. Obviously, it did not deter me from purchasing it, but I'm really glad they printed the references in the rule book so I could just flip to that versus having to try and look across the table and go, oh my gosh, what does that say? But so overall, I'm going to give this one a thumbs up, recommend it. Get your kiddos to play it with you, get that alphabet knowledge going, and get that deductive reasoning going. This has been the Game Dad saying, hope you have fun.